Let's go to the next set of questions that deal with, some of those more complex, more complicated kinds of conversations. And Reg, we'll start with you before we go to Renee and Angie. And when we think about the career leaders, how do they go about, what advice can you give them about developing trust with incoming political appointees?
Well, first of all, I think as I alluded to earlier, the skepticism, I think, with anyone, and particularly if they've never served in public service before. I mean, it's an unknown for them. It's going to come across as very complex for them. They may feel a tremendous amount of anxiety, and because of that sprinter's mindset that they have, they want to get to results. In some cases quickly, and in many instances, perhaps more quickly than is advisable, given what the current state is. And so being as open and honest as one can be is important, because you are trying to allay their fears about who you are, and maybe, they may have a perception of who they think you are. And so it requires having a thick skin. You may feel put upon by some of the questions that are asked, and some of the actions that you are initially asked to take. But if you sit down and explain in detail what is at stake and what they may be risking by some of the things they might want to do that aren't necessarily advisable, without more analysis or conversation and communication with the workforce. Kotter talks about the change management approach, and you have to have people ready to move along with you with good ideas. And so some of the ideas may be great in application and in practicality later down the road, but if the workforce that you're expected to get them through isn't prepared to move in that direction, then very often things get scuttled before they even begin. And then there's the blame game that can play out. So communicate honestly, assume positive intent. The American people have chosen who they want to lead them into the future. And you want to make sure that you are being an enabler of the kinds of things that your oath of office require. And so being an impediment is not going to allay their fears or endear them to you, and with a sense of trust in what you're about.
Thanks, Reg. Renee, your thoughts on the notion of developing trust?
Yeah, so part of trust I see, and your role is you are striving to either gain or maintain the influence that you have built over the years in the government. And you want to convey both support or curiosity towards the policy agenda or the agenda that somebody comes in with. And the best way to do that, I think, is seek to understand first and foremost. And when I say understand, not just at the high level, but go ahead and dive into, well, what would that look like to you? What does success look like? Because you don't know if it's metrics or if it's a complete policy change, or that they want to put a reg in through the process, right? So understand, if this is their agenda, how are they going to measure the success of that agenda? And in that being curious, then you're continuing to gain and maintain that influence that you have as an executive in the United States government. And this is also what I would call sort of the seeds, planting the seeds of trust very quickly, is by just leaning in and understanding, and the people and anybody would start to be calm and say, hey, they really are meaningfully considering what I have to say. So I would say that you've got to really focus on maintaining that influence and be curious about what the individual wants to get done and what does that success look like, so that you can get to alignment as quickly as possible. And then you can start to advise on the guardrails.
Great advice. Angie, your thoughts on the notion of developing trust with the incoming teams?
I think it is really incredibly important, especially depending on the level that you're at, right? And so I'll just take from my experience in the level that I was at, it became incredibly important that when I sat down with the incoming political team, that we had a really good conversation over, as Renee said, like the direction in which that they want to go, some of the ideas that they might have, and then be able to help them understand and see how to get to yes, right? And so in getting them to yes, and listen, it doesn't have to always be exactly the way that they originally thought it was going to be. It could be, hey, we're going to get to yes, but it's going to be a little bit like this instead of like this straight line that you kind of thought we were going to do. And to be honest, there were times in my career, and I think it's important for the executives listening to this to know, there were absolutely times in my career where I did not agree with the direction in which the politicals wanted to go. I didn't agree with the policies, and I thought it was incumbent upon me to speak the truth to them as to where I thought that that was not the right direction to go, and then to offer them an alternative. And at the end of the day, I didn't always win those arguments, right? There were times whenever they said, we hear you, Ange, but this is the direction we're going to go and you need to carry it out. Then it's like, got it. And as a career civil servant, especially as an executive, then you carry out what this new administration or any administration wants you to do, because that's our job, right? And so I think it's important, and Reggie said it, right? Unless it's illegal, immoral, and I used to say fattening, but ethical is a much better one, much better word. But there are times whenever I can remember during one administration, I'm not going to say which one, where I said to them, I can get you to yes, but this line right here, if you ask me to cross it, now you've asked me to go illegal. Okay. And I'm not going to do illegal. I'll take you up to the line. The rest is on your own. And I will tell you, the deputy secretary had to step in and stop what would have been probably an illegal pay action, right? And so, but I didn't lose trust with the political team over that. I think at the end of the day, they kind of appreciated that I was willing to take them to the cliff, I think, as Reggie said. I just wasn't willing to go hold their hand and jump off the cliff with them. Okay. And so, but sometimes they're going to jump off the cliff. And when they do, the other way of building trust, quite frankly, is to say to them, on your way down, I'm happy to be your branch that you can grab onto, and I'm going to help you pull yourself back up off the cliff, out from hitting the ground. Okay. Because, and I will tell you, this happened even whenever I was a GS 13, working in Department of Defense as a labor relations officer, and I would deal with commanders who thought they knew more than me about labor relations, right? And they'd end up with unfair labor practice charges. And rather than say, told you so, instead, I would say, now give me a call, and now I'm going to help you get out of those unfair labor practice charges. And then what I found is that trust gets built over time to where they know that you're going to give them the truth. You're going to still carry out their actions to the cliff point, and then you're going to rescue them as best you can on their way back up. And I think that that's an important thing for us as executives to remember, not just with ourselves, but with all of our bosses, right? And with our teams as well, because to me, that's in a way how you stay true to yourself, true to your values. And yet you walk that fine line of balancing what they want done with what you think and in your heart of hearts needs to be done.
And if I could finish the thought on trust, certainly it takes time. It's not going to happen on day one with any incoming leadership, whether it's career or political. The things that you guys talked about, honesty, integrity, transparency, good listening skills and what have you. I'll offer two more pieces before we go to the next question. One is, don't underestimate the quality of your briefing books, because that sometimes is the first introduction of you and your team. And second of all, I always thought that the role of the leader was to get their staff valuable face time in front of the incoming leadership. Not only would the incoming leadership develop trust on that leader, but also on the quality of the staff as well. So just a few other pieces of advice. Let's go to the next question related to the role of the civil servant. Renee, we'll start with you. The role of the civil servant in helping the incoming political appointees better understand and leverage the role of the career civil servant. So I'm always reluctant to use the word educated because incoming leaders are clearly educated. What I look for is they're coming in from sometimes outside the federal government. They need to have an understanding of the role of the civil service so they could leverage them. So Renee, I'll get your thoughts on that before we move to Angie and then Reggie.
So I'm going to begin with a top tip when working with humans, whether you're bringing them in from wherever. And that is when you're starting to brief people, two things. One is bring chocolate, assuming they're not allergic to it. When someone eats a piece of chocolate, and I've had some exposure to human performance teams, this would be elite athletes, this would be as well as special ops forces and that. And the individual who opens the piece of chocolate, so sorry, Angela is fattening, but I run by chocolate, so I find it fine. I'll just take a few more runs, right, to do that. And that is that when you open and eat that chocolate, you'll have a positive, actually emotional experience, an endorphin, and it will get related to what's in front of the individual, much like we train dogs, right, with positive reinforcement. In that you can use chocolate as your positive reinforcement and at least start to create that happy feeling right in front of somebody when you have a piece of chocolate with it. And so that's, I think, my top tip for folks is remember the chocolate. I'd also say when we get to the briefing books, Sully, I'm glad you brought this up. Keep them short. They're not going to read a 1-inch binder. I went through 6 congressional hearings and I got big giant binders. And I would study those over the weekend before the hearing, but I didn't read every page of it. So don't assume that because you've put it in this book that they're going to read it. What you want to do is pull out boy, what do I need to know the first few weeks that I'm here? And what do I need to know the next few weeks that I'm here? So when you get to briefing people, break that chunk up into timeframes, which I think Angela gets to your phased approach, right? When people are coming in, they're gaining more experience and they're kind of getting places where you help them. So your role of the civil servant is to help them get up to speed as fast as possible. Your role is to gain the trust, which we've already spent some time on. Your role is to advocate for your people and for your program and your mission and how it fits within the global mission of the agency with wherever you work.
Cool. Good advice. Thank you, Renee. Angie, your thoughts on helping the incoming leadership better understand and perhaps leverage the role of the career civil servant?
Yeah, sure. One of the things that really kind of comes to mind is, for me, it was about helping them understand the context of why we do what we do, right? And so a lot of times they'll look at something and they'll think that's an absolutely stupid policy or it's a stupid regulation. And sometimes we feel the same way, right? But there's context as to how we got there. And so walking them through, like, listen, we used to do it this way, right? Until there was a special interest group that really lobbied on the Hill and they got that legislation changed, or there was a lawsuit. And as a result of that lawsuit, we found that now we have to do this instead of that. And so what I always have found is that taking the time to help the political leaders understand that we didn't just sit around behind closed doors and say, hey, how can we screw the American public? Instead, there were all kinds of reasons for how and why we got to where we are. And listen, there's so many things we'd love their support on and trying to figure out how to maybe undo some of those things, right? Or how to get Congress to legislate something different than what we have sitting in front of us. And so along those lines, it's also helping them better understand the budget process, the congressional process, in my world, in Reggie's world, the role that OPM plays in some of the things that they want to do or not do, the role that OMB plays in getting our budgets and things through. And so when you take the time to like peel the onion back and to pull the threads on certain things and show them and help them understand where they could perhaps influence and provide a means for us to make the kinds of changes that we want, they want, and we want together. I found that really helped them to understand things better, right? And it wasn't just about understanding how HR is done. It's about understanding how we got to where we are with some of the crazy HR things that we have to do today. And again, that's just from, the world in which I was at least advising them on.
Good advice. And Reggie, your thoughts on helping the incoming leadership better understand and leverage the role of the career civil servant?
Well, to pick up from Angie's last point, the incrementalism that has led us to where we are in the history of the government is something that's lost on some people, and perhaps at times it is good to remind them of that. It's also important to remind them, and I tend to use the imagery of the tightrope walking. You can either do that with a net or without a net, and the civil servants who make up the federal service can be your net, getting back to that imagery of going off the mountain or falling off the wire. We all make mistakes, whether that be careerist or political, and it's always those civil servants, those dedicated people who believe in this system and perform that day-to-day work in spite of the realities of the situation, very often putting aside their own personal lives in commitment to the service to the public. And so kind of gets back to, people reminding your staff to take care of themselves, but also letting those political appointees come to appreciate the importance of those valuable staffers who day in and day out deliver for them, and that they are not political footballs or punching bags, as sometimes the media and the public and some political leaders would have you believe. That these are human beings. They have motivations that, for the most part, are noble in doing the work they do. But you also need to understand their intrinsic and extrinsic motivations. And so reminding those political leaders of that. And one thing that I meant to bring up with an earlier question, getting back to putting together the packages, make sure you don't overwhelm them with government speak and acronyms. Very often those kinds of things make people distrust you because they think you're trying to do some sort of okey doke with them and trying to get them being a speed bump for what they may be trying to accomplish.
Great. Thanks, Reg. And that's a nice segue into the last question I want to ask in terms of best approaches for more challenging situations, which Angie, I'll get to you in a minute. But one of the ways to, one of the things that career civil servants understand is how to navigate their bureaucracy. The notion of navigating the human capital or the IT, the acquisition, and what have you. Angie, you had mentioned that political appointees are coming in running a sprint while we're running the marathon. One of the many types of challenging situations, challenging conversations we might have is that the new leadership wants to come in and do something rather quickly in human capital or the IT planning or the IT acquisition area. I know that the three of you have had these conversations with incoming leadership in terms of we'd like to do this, but there are processes in place. So can you talk to us, Angie? We'll start with you and then go to Reg and finish up with Renee. Can you talk to us about how you might handle some of these kinds of situations?
Sure. I mean, and that's almost always, right? That there's certain things that, hey, by July 1st, we want to have X implemented. And many of us know, oh, Lordy, that's going to probably take 3 years. But instead, what you do is you sit down and you say, listen, if we're going to get to July 1st for an implementation date on this, then this is what the help that I need from you, right? We're going to have to work our OPM contacts. We're going to have to work our OMB contacts. We're going to have to work with the unions. We're going to have to work with Congress. And it's not to create fear amongst them. It's to help them understand where I need their help if we're going to get through what they want to have done within that. If we can't have their influence or their pull or their ability to push some of these things through, then it is going to take a little bit longer, for us to get that done, what you're asking us to do. And so I found that by involving them in the process of trying to get things done was probably the most successful way that I had of helping them understand how long sometimes things can take, right? Because once they start hitting their head up against the wall with some of these agencies that we hit our heads up against the wall with, they begin to understand that, wow, it's not that the team is, it's not that my career civil servants or my executives are stalling me or, trying to tell me to talk to the hand. It's that they're stumbling, trying to get this done just the same as I am now. And so it builds a camaraderie in a way. And it also, quite frankly, sometimes they are successful of breaking through some of the things that we just weren't able to get done as careerists. So again, I find including them, involving them, and not just sitting there explaining why things are hard or why things take so long. Nobody really wants to hear that, right? Me included, to be honest. And so that's why it just, again, it was an approach that I thought worked well for me whenever I was trying to get things through in a quicker timeline that matched their expectations.
Nice approach. Thank you for that. Reggie, your thoughts on this?
Well, I totally co-sign Angie's points. I think that it's important to remember that these political appointees often don't come with a wealth of government experience. Sometimes they do. And when they come in having served in a previous administration, you can often have their base of knowledge from that experience play out in this one. But personally, I've always been rewarded for speaking truth to power. I think Angie's alluding to the fact that you want your political leadership to be engaged in the process as much as you need them to be. I'm a firm believer in, take control of those things that you can as an executive. You're there in an executive capacity because you bring talents and knowledge and abilities that qualify you for that level of responsibility. Make sure you take command of that responsibility, and in doing so, you may actually impress this newly minted political appointee, but also make sure that they understand what they have to do in support of whatever it is they're trying to accomplish. Because you as a careerist, and even with a crackerjack staff of civil servants, sometimes can't move the needle that is being controlled outside your agency. And so speaking that truth to them, presenting them with the facts in the Joe Friday, I know that may be a reference that our younger listeners may not be able to appreciate. The television show Dragnet, Joe Friday would also always say, just the facts, man. Be as succinct as you can be and making that case, but don't hesitate to make the case. Not speaking truth to power is often not going to get you what you need to get, really, for the protection of your people.
Well, thanks, Reg. And Renee, your thoughts on these crucial, challenging conversations or situations that oftentimes we face?
So I think my colleagues have kind of covered, I think the big thing is explain the process. And for the most part, you just handle some of the bureaucracy pieces associated and then tell them where they can be of help. And there were times when I've got this, you go do this, because sometimes there's things you don't want them to touch because of the tail associated with a particular process. Acquisition processes are very long. HR processes, some are long, some are not long. So it's kind of like, let me handle some of this stuff. And then we have a conversation about what's important to you. And as long as it sort of stays within the guardrails, just execute accordingly.
Thanks, Renee. Thanks for that advice. And let me offer one other piece of advice to our listeners before I close. And that is that the advice I give to many managers and executives when you're managing up is have a conversation with the leader. In this case, it might be a political appointee, which basically asks, what are you trying to accomplish and why? Now that I understand what you're trying to accomplish, let me get with the staff and we'll work out how we get it done. And this again goes back to the understanding that the career staff has on how to navigate the federal government, how to navigate the bureaucracy. So as we close, I want to thank the three of you for your insights, comments, and advice that should be of great value to career civil servants. I also want to remind our listeners to visit the partnership's website, ourpublicservice.org, to get additional information to help folks navigate the transition. Thank you all for listening.